All right, hello and welcome to Chapter 26. I'm hoping you watched Chapter 25 or listened to Chapter 25 because it gave you a foundation on negotiable instruments. And if you don't have that, some of 26 here is going to be a little difficult to understand. But we're going to jump ahead. And fortunately, these are relatively brief chapters, so you can't get too lost without being able to go back and take a look. And again, for those that are curious, we're using Business Law, Texts and Cases by Clarkson and Miller, and I'm actually using the 15th edition, which I'll have out in front of me, and refer to it primarily just through the PowerPoints, but occasionally I might say, oh yeah, on page 479 you've got the case of In re Bass or something, which is a North Carolina case in case you're interested, and it is in our text on page 479. Okay, so we're going to talk about the transferability of these negotiable instruments, and we're going to talk about being a holder in due course. Actually, we're going to talk about being both a holder and a holder in due course. So let's go ahead and jump forward. All right, so remember the utility of these negotiable instruments really is founded upon the idea that you can negotiate or trade them with each other. Turn them in, get money, or give them to another person and get services. So negotiation is defined as when you are transferring an interest, the instrument, excuse me, from the transferee to a holder. The person who gets the instrument at the end of this is called the holder, sometimes a specific type of holder called a holder in due course. And this is defined for us under UCC 3-201 subsection A. Remember that section 3, Article 3 of the UCC has everything to do with negotiable instruments here. Okay, so there's two methods really to make someone a holder, to go forward with this transfer, and it's really going to depend upon whether we're talking about if it is order paper or is it bearer paper. Okay, so negotiating these different types of interest. If it is an order instrument, so like a check, it says pay to the order of John Smith. Or is it a bearer instrument, pay to cash? To negotiate a order instrument, what's required under the UCC is there have to be proper endorsements. And an endorsement is just going to be a signature, usually without additional words or statements. And most of the time we're going to see it on the back of the instrument itself. If it is a bearer instrument, remember that can be pay to the order of cash or pay to bearer, makes it a bearer instrument, then technically no endorsement is necessary. It's not required. And that, by the way, is UCC 2- I think it's 30, yeah, UCC 3-205, excuse me. You can change negotiable instruments from being bearer paper to order paper or order paper to bearer paper. And we'll talk about how that is done, usually through these different endorsements. Okay, so an endorsement, again, is a signature without additional words or statements, and most of the time you're going to see it on the back of the negotiable instrument. Now, sometimes if the negotiable instrument, say, is a longer document, like maybe a certificate of deposit or a promissory note, there might be an attached piece of paper. And that attached piece of paper is called an allonge, or allonge, A-L-L-O-N-G-E. You rarely see them on checks. I think in most of my life I've seen them maybe less than half a dozen times attached to a check, and it's usually going to be if there's some issue about signing it on the back. Someone has attached an allonge to a check. That can happen, but most of the time it's going to be on the more complex instruments, like a promissory note or something like that, where you're going to have an allonge on it. The person who signs or who transfers it is called the endorser, because we're going to add that, of course, and make it a little bit more complex, just like we added payor, payee, drawer, drawee. We're going to call this guy, or person, rather, gender neutral here, the endorser. Okay, so what are the different types of endorsement that we can come across? Well, there are, first of all, blank endorsements. And this is UCC 3-205 sub B, and basically you flip it over. Let's stay with our example as a check. You flip a check over, you sign your name. So the check is made out to John Doe. John Doe flips it over. It is an order piece of paper, pay the order of John Doe. When he signs it, it is now bearer paper. And that's important because the bank that accepts it now can transfer that instrument. If it couldn't, then you could see how the negotiation of a check would be relatively useless. Now, sometimes we see special endorsements where we're going to say, okay, we're going to add things like pay to the order of John. That identifies who the endorser is making it payable to. This prevents really it not becoming bearer paper. It maintains it as an order instrument. You can also have qualified endorsements. Most endorsements are absolute, they're unqualified, but maybe you get a check and you don't know if it's any good. And someone says, well, I'll take the check. If you don't, I'll gamble on it. You say, okay, I will endorse it over to you without recourse, but I don't guarantee payment. And now you wouldn't see this very often, except possibly between agent or an attorney maybe who was signing a negotiable instrument, and he didn't know if the underlying value was there and wanted to make sure that everybody knows that just because I'm the attorney signing this as the representative of the estate, I'm not guaranteeing payment personally from it, so without recourse. You can also try to prohibit future endorsements. So you could say payable only to John Smith. That's going to really limit it. You can put in qualified endorsements. You can put in conditional endorsements, trust endorsements. So looking at a couple of these, conditional endorsement. If you put some sort of condition on it, and remember, checks can be a little difficult here, but if you put payable when work is complete, so suppose it's a promissory note or something like that, payable when work is complete. Well, essentially you've added a condition, you've really undercut the requirement of negotiation. You can make the endorsee or the collecting bank, you can put, for example, for deposit only or pay any bank. Those are going to say, well, the only people that can take that and become holders of this instrument is a bank. And that's good in case you're going to lose it. Whenever I endorse a check, and I don't endorse many anymore, I used to all the time, wrote for deposit only. Trust endorsements, now this is something that attorneys like myself sometimes run across. So it might be that I'm signing a check for an estate, or I'm signing something and I want to endorse it, and I want to say, okay, I am an agent for this person and I'm endorsing. So that's a trust endorsement. Pay to John Smith as agent for Jim Jones, or pay to John Smith in trust for Jim Jones. All those would be acceptable trust endorsements. Now, how do we convert order to bearer and then bearer to order, or vice versa? If you take an instrument payable to cash, okay, so I get a check that says payable to cash $10. I flip it over and I endorse it. I say payable to John Smith. Well, I've changed that from bearer paper to order paper. Now, if I endorse an order instrument, payable to order of John Smith, on the bank with just a blank, and I just sign John Smith, that's now bearer paper. So the big two categories that this chapter is really hitting is order paper, payable to, let's just say, a specific person, and bearer paper, payable to anybody that has the negotiable instrument. You can see an example of this, again, in the 15th edition. You're going to see an example of this on page 485. It's, I think it's called Exhibit 26.6, converting order paper to bearer paper and vice versa. You'll see a quick example of that. Might make it a little bit more understandable for you. Okay, other problems with endorsements. We're going to talk about forgeries a little bit later. We'll get to that in chapter 27. But one of the things that can happen is you can have a misspelling, or someone can use a nickname or an incomplete name. So what if the endorsement, let's suppose it is made out to James Chapman, my name, and I sign it J. Chapman, J-A-Y, because I often go with the name J. I can sign it both ways and it becomes an endorsed check. or if the bank accepts it, it's an endorsed check. If it's payable to two parties, paid to, my wife's name is Shirley, paid to James or Shirley Chapman, then either of us signing it will convert it into bearer paper if we just signed in blank. If it was payable to J and Shirley Chapman, then in order for it to be properly endorsed, both of us must sign it. If it's payable to an organization, so let's suppose the First National Bank, then whoever is a representative or an agent of that bank can endorse it over. All right, so I said it's kind of important whether you're merely a holder or a holder in due course. Okay, why is it important? Well, the big reason it's important is when you go to collect on the instrument. If you're just a regular old holder, then you merely have gotten possession of the check. And there's going to be more defenses to the payment of that check. And I keep saying check. Obviously, I want to remind you that these can be almost any negotiable instrument. If you are a holder in due course, however, there are fewer ways, or fewer defenses, if you will, to getting paid. And there are basic requirements to be a holder in due course. So how do you get to be a holder in due course? Well, first of all, you have to take the negotiable instrument, the check, for value. You can't have picked it up. You can't have gotten it as a gift necessarily, although there's a shelter rule there. You've got to have taken it in good faith. That's the second requirement. So you got to take it and believe that, yeah, it's a good instrument. There's no problem here. The other thing is you can't have notice of any of the following about the instrument. We'll go through these, but that it's overdue, that it's been dishonored, that there are defenses to payment, that there are claims against it, that there are unauthorized signatures on it, that there have been alterations, or that it is so irregular that it would strike a reasonable person as not being an authentic check or negotiable instrument. I keep saying check, my apologies. So let's look at them a little bit at a time. How do you take for value? This is UCC 3-302 and a little bit of 303 as well. Well, there are 5 ways we'll say that you can give consideration. You can perform some promise. Okay, you can acquire a security interest in it. You can take it for a pre-existing or an antecedent claim. You can be given it in payment for something you actually did, and that's maybe the most common. Or it can be an irrevocable commitment as a payment for something. Again, most of these, probably 99.999, is you get a check or negotiable instrument in payment. Occasionally an antecedent claim, you're owed money, occasionally security interest, occasionally that commitment, occasionally a promise, but most of the time you're going to get it because you actually sold a good or a service to someone and delivered it then. Sometimes it's a promise to do in the future. You're not a holder in due course, however, if you get your negotiable instrument in a judicial sale or if you get it as part of a legal process. Not if you take over as an estate, as the administrator, you're not a holder in due course. And not if it is a bulk transfer, kind of the going out of business of corporate assets, are you a holder in due course. Okay, so the second requirement, the big one, honesty in fact. That is good faith. Now, good faith is something that underlies the UCC all the time. We see this constantly. The requirement is basically that you can't be a thief. You can't be a cheat. And I guess part of the problem here is the popular perception is, well, you know, it's really hard to prove someone's a thief. It's really hard to prove, so, you know, you're never a thief. No, good faith is the underlying idea that if it, you know, smells like a bad thing, looks like a bad thing, you can't act that way. So, honesty in fact, that you observed, that you were honest in your dealings. And if it's a question about, well, we don't know whether you were directly honest, was it reasonable what you did? Was it commercially reasonable? That'll prevent you from taking in good faith. Now, if it only applies to the transferor. So if I took in good faith from a thief, I didn't know he was a thief, and I got it, then I could be a holder in due course. The basic question here is ask would a reasonable man believe that he was getting a negotiable instrument without any defect? Was there anything suspicious? Was it grossly inadequate? Those can be red flags, and we can say, well, no, I'm sorry, you're a holder, but you're not a holder in due course. Okay, you can't know that it is overdue, and that's very often, you look at the date, you look at when you're getting it, that it's been dishonored. Big one here is it stamped? Does it say on dishonored? Is it an uncured default, or is it part of a series? Not something to worry about. Do you know of unauthorized signatures on it? Do you know that there are defenses against payment against it? Or do you know that it's so bad that nobody reasonably would take it? This kind of goes back to good faith here. It's irregular, incomplete. So it's written in crayon, or there's cross-outs on it, and the ink's all different, and the different colors and different sizes. That would be irregular. When is notice? Actual knowledge. Or if someone tells you about it. Or if you should have reason to know of any defect at the time you come in possession of it. All right, so overdue. If it's a demand instrument, if you take it, okay, knowing a reasonable amount of time has passed. And that's usually 90 days on a check. Now, it can be 30 days on a check, so you have to be a little bit careful there. If it's a timed instrument, any time past the express due date lets you know it's an overdue instrument. Any time past the installment date lets you know. Now, it's not a default if interest but not principal has already been paid on it, so don't worry so much about if we're paying interest, but have a balloon payment or something in the future. Dishonored. This happens when the negotiable instrument isn't paid, and this dishonored there has been a presentation. And typically what happens is when a check comes in or a negotiable instrument comes in and it doesn't get paid, there's a big stamp on it that says, okay, this is no good. You can't collect on it. So if it happens, then the holder has notice this is a dishonored instrument, usually, as I said, noted on the negotiable instrument of the check itself, therefore you can't be holder in due course. You can't become holder due course if you have notice of certain defenses. So what defenses? That it's incomplete, it's so defective it's obviously a non-negotiable instrument, or it's irregular, ambiguous, substantial difference in handwriting. If it's a voidable obligation, if you know defenses to payment with block payment, like it's forged. This is also, again, a lot of this relates back to that good faith there, which is kind of a catch-all. All right, now there's something I said here a little bit earlier, I don't know if you caught it when I was talking about gift. There is this shelter principle. Let's suppose that I am a holder in due course, and I get a negotiable instrument from someone that I pay value for, it's $100, and I give it to my son. Is my son a holder in due course? Well, remember, you have to take consideration. It's a gift, there's no consideration. You'd say, well, no then, Mr. Chapman, he's not. But we have the shelter rule. If you get a negotiable instrument from someone who is already a holder in due course, you're going to get the status of holder in due course. Now, we're generally not talking about someone in the chain of endorsement and you're just trying to fix it by passing it through 3 or 4 people. That's not going to help you. All right, relatively short chapter. It's only about 20 minutes. We'll move on to chapter 27. Good night.